Our story begins on February 22nd, 1732. On that day, at approximately 10 o'clock in the morning, a boy was born at Bridges Creek in Westmoreland County, Virginia. That boy would grow up to be the leader of the armies of the Revolution, would be elected the first president of the United States, and before he died, would be known and honored all over the world. His name was George Washington. The house in which Washington was born was typical of the farmhouses of the day. A one-story frame building, rooms on the ground floor, others in the attic. With two large chimneys at each end, the house commanded a sweeping view of the Potomac River. George was the oldest of 6 children born to Augustine and Mary Washington. His father died when he was 11 years old, leaving George to the care of his mother, who would become the guiding influence throughout his life. Although formal education in Virginia was limited, George attended a schoolhouse under the tutelage of Mr. Williams. There, he learned to read, write, and cipher, later studying geography, bookkeeping, and surveying. By the time he was 12, Washington could write with a clear, bold hand, copying many good rules and sayings in his writing book. But young George was not always copying good sayings. He was a tall, strong boy who excelled in outdoor sports and games. Early one morning, with his brothers looking on, George leaped onto the back of the spirited, untamed colt that belonged to his mother. Wild with rage, the colt reared straight up, hoping to throw off his rider. But young George stayed with the animal until, in a final desperate leap into the air, the colt burst a blood vessel and fell to the ground dead. When he was 14, George received his mother's permission to pursue a career in the British Naval Service. But even while his personal bags were being carried out to a waiting ship, his mother decided to withhold her consent. History owes Mary Washington a debt of gratitude, for if her son had become an officer in the British Navy, the United States as we know it might not exist today. After leaving school, George went to live at the home of his half-brother Lawrence at Mount Vernon. There he continued his study of land surveying, going into the field to perform a number of practical exercises. Just after he turned 16, he was hired by Lord Fairfax, a family friend, to conduct a survey of his vast land holdings in western Virginia. George and a small party embarked on a month-long trip west across the Blue Ridge Mountains. Of his experiences at the time, he wrote, "We camped in the woods, and after we had pitched our tent and made a large fire, we pulled out our knapsack to recruit ourselves. Every one was his own cook. Our spits were forked sticks. As for dishes, we had none." While on the trip, George and a friend came across a band of Indians who stopped to perform a war dance. The Indians leaped into the air and swung their hatchets. George watched in awe as the forest echoed with the whoops and shouts to the beat of their drums. At the age of 17, Washington was appointed a public surveyor of Culpeper County. Almost as a harbinger of the military career that would follow, his occupation as a land surveyor furnished him with personal knowledge of the men living in the backwoods, many of whom would later become soldiers in Washington's army. One of his early assignments was to survey Belhaven, a hamlet on the Potomac that later became the city of Alexandria. Recent discoveries reveal that Washington personally produced more than 200 surveys over a span of 52 years, from the time he was 15 years old to less than 5 weeks before he died. After his brother died, leaving him the family estate at Mount Vernon, George was serving as a major in the Virginia militia. During this time, the French army had taken possession of a large area of land within the province of Virginia. Viewing this encroachment with alarm, Governor Robert Dinwiddie appointed Washington to travel to the Ohio River Valley. His mission? To deliver a message to the French commander demanding that he remove his troops from the area. On October 30th, 1753, at the age of 21, Washington began his expedition into the Ohio Valley, departing from Williamsburg with a small party of men and supplies. They made their way through wild country and treacherous terrain. Recent storms of rain and snow had swollen the rivers, requiring the horses to swim across. To establish friendly contact with the Indian leaders, Washington visited Shingas, half-king of the Delawares. Shingas gave the young major strategic information about the actions of the French. After receiving the French commander's reply to Governor Dinwiddie's letter, Washington ordered his party to return home. The journey back faced hazardous twists and turns with each step. Crossing the Allegheny River on a homemade raft, Washington wrote in his journal, "We were jammed in the ice in such a manner that we expected every moment our raft to sink and ourselves to perish. I put on a setting pole to try to stop the raft. It jerked me out into 10 feet of water, but I fortunately saved myself by catching hold of one of the raft arms." On his return to Williamsburg, Washington paid a visit to the Indian Queen Aliquippa, who had complained that he neglected to pay his respects on his outward journey. Washington presented her with a watch coat and a bottle of rum, completely securing her good graces. Returning to Williamsburg, Washington wrote a full report of his journey and presented it to the governor of Virginia. Although the French commander refused to remove his forces, Washington won great acclaim in fulfilling a difficult and hazardous mission. Because of its political significance, the account of Washington's 78-day mission to the Ohio Valley was published in newspapers throughout the colonies and reprinted as a pamphlet in England. 2 years later, Washington was serving as a colonel with General Braddock, head of British forces in America. In their march to Fort Duquesne from Virginia, they were attacked by a small band of French and Indians. Braddock was killed in the fight that ended in a crushing defeat of the British in the Battle of the Wilderness. In a letter to his mother on July 18th, George wrote, "I luckily escaped without a wound, though I had 4 bullets through my coat and 2 horses shot under me." While on military business as Commander-in-Chief of the Virginia Militia, Washington stopped en route to New York at the home of a friend. It was there, as a house guest, that he met Mary Phillips. Described by historians as Washington's first real love, Miss Phillips was young, vivacious, accomplished, and beautiful. Though enamored of her charm and grace, the young colonel had military duties that prevented him from pursuing the object of his attention. Instead, one of his associates won her fair hand. A year later, Washington met Martha Dandridge Custis, described at the time as the prettiest and richest widow in Virginia. Martha regarded herself, in her own words, as an old-fashioned Virginia housekeeper, steady as a clock, busy as a bee, and cheerful as a cricket. After a 12-month courtship, the couple was married and made their home at Mount Vernon, together with Martha's 2 children from her first marriage, John Parke Custis, who was 6 years old, and Martha Parke Custis, who was 4. Washington passed the first 15 years of his married life at Mount Vernon as a Southern planter. He was a good farmer and a capable plantation owner who enjoyed managing his acres. Washington regularly engaged in hunting expeditions at Mount Vernon and at neighboring estates. A bold rider and horseman, he especially enjoyed hunting for canvasback ducks. During this period, he joined the Ohio Company in a commercial project to drain the Great Dismal Swamp. A large body of water in the back country of Virginia, The swamp was 6 miles long and 3 miles across. After Washington explored the area and issued his recommendations, the project was undertaken, converting otherwise unproductive land to cultivation. In 1774, Washington traveled on horseback with Patrick Henry and Edmund Pendleton to attend the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Washington's presence as a delegate helped unify the Congress as it voted to resolve its grievances against the British government. A year later, the 13 colonies in America were moving closer to separating from England. On April 19th, British soldiers and American militia engaged in skirmishes at Lexington and Concord, the first official fighting that marked the opening round of the Revolutionary War.